skin and bones.
How hungry were you?
All the time. We were hungry all the time. I don't remember in 4 or 5 years not having the feeling of being not being hungry.
How were the people in the silo able to wash themselves?
Well, like I said, we did have a little water, so just wash your face and hands.
What problem did you have with lice there?
Also lice, lice throughout the whole time. That was the biggest problem. But that was our daily occupation. We would have gone crazy if we didn't have the lousing ourselves.
What kind of conversations were you having with your family?
Well, like I said, being I wasn't in school, my father would make it a ritual and sit down every morning with me and my sister. My brother was already out of school. And he managed to have a little piece of paper or find a little piece of cardboard or something and a pencil and teach us a little bit of arithmetic, the timetable. I mean, I was illiterate. I didn't know how to write, read, do arithmetic or nothing. I just didn't know anything. So he would really sit with me every morning. He made it a ritual. You have to sit down. Even though if I didn't want to, I had to sit. And he would teach me. He would tell me history. He would tell me some stories. My mother would sit and tell us stories from her hometown, just to pass the time, not to go crazy. I mean, here you have children who have no chance of playing a game, having any toys. What do you do with them? What do? You have to keep them busy. You're scared and you're worried, but you still have to keep your children busy.
And so when they sat down and spoke to you about history and stories, what stories do you remember them telling you?
Oh, some history. My father was in the Hungarian army for some reason, even though he was Austrian at the time. Austria was occupied by Hungary, and he got to go to the Hungarian army, didn't understand a word of Hungarian, and if they told him to go left, he would go right, and we always laughed about those stories. And those are the kind of stories. My mother would tell us stories from her childhood in Poland, how she grew up. There were 9 siblings, there were 9 children, and her father was a Hebrew school teacher, how he taught them Jewish history. They observed all the holidays. He was a really well-liked person. He would take the children into his home and teach them, other children from the village. Those are the type of stories that my mother and father would tell us.
While you were together with these 60 other people in the silo, what kind of services did people have there? How observant were they as far as religion was concerned while they were together?
None of them were religious people, I don't think. I don't ever saw anybody laying tefillin or having a prayer book. Of course, nobody could carry a prayer book when you're running. You just have your one blanket that you're holding on. Some men, I think, were like Friday night, maybe just mumbling to themselves prayers. That was the extent of it.
How many other children were with you?
We were the only children.
How many women were pregnant?
No pregnant women that I remember. Maybe there were, and I didn't know what it was.
What children were born while you were running?
None of them.
So then you said there were some crowbars, and the silo was made out of
concrete and wood. I think that what they did, they must have bashed in those doors to get out. They finally got out.
And
So
what time of the year was it when you left?
it was summer.
And what year was it?
That was in 1943.
How did you know what year it was?
My father kept a little bit of a piece of paper, and he would write down what day it is. He would try and keep up what month it was, and he carried them in his little pocket all the time, so he would keep up with it to know where we are. And, we didn't know where we were exactly, but what time of the year it is. And by the weather we could tell, is it spring, is it summer, is it winter?
And so after you left the silo, what's the first thing you remember?
running as fast as we could. And we went to another place. And was a village with Muslims. That's the first time we ever saw Muslim people. The men wore a fez, you know, those red hats. The women were covered with those outfits. You just see their nose and eyes.
And what did you think that was?
We were just, they were people. My parents knew what they were. I mean, they told us they are Muslim people, and they were gypsies there also, who were also running. The gypsies were being prosecuted just like the Jewish people.
What did they tell you?
The gypsies were just trying to steal things from us if we had anything, but we didn't have anything.
And what did the Muslims
Again, they were pretty nice, not as open as they were a little bit more discreet, not as open as the other peasants in the other villages, but we also found one nice family who took us in. They had a pretty nice little house, and they said, you can stay here as long as you want.
What were their names?
Oh, I don't really remember. They had weird names, like, I don't remember their names at all. I just remember they had a young son who was about maybe 17, and he took one look at my sister, who was a pretty little teenager, and he said to my parents, I'm going to marry her. You're not leaving here. I'm going to marry her. And my mother said, no, you can't marry her. We are Jewish, and we have to keep running. We're being prosecuted, and you just can't marry her. And he said, I'm going to marry her, or I'm going to kill her. So,
what did it mean to them to know you were Jewish?
I don't think they meant anything to them at the time. I don't think they were aware of what's really happening. They were peasants. They were uneducated people. They really didn't. They were not hostile towards us. They were good, matter of fact. Like I said, they gave us a place where to lay on the floor again. But that big scare of this boy wanting to have my sister, we had to leave. We had to run, and we hid in a basement by another peasant. We hid my sister especially so he wouldn't find her.
And what nationality were this next group of peasants?
They were all Muslims in that whole area.
And so how did they treat you, this next family?
They were all nice. I just said that it's beyond I can't really, you know, when I think about it, if a family would come to the United States and at your doorstep and say, here we are, 5 people with kids, would you give us a spot to sleep? We'd go, well, you know, who are these people? What do I do with them? They asked no questions. They just said, here's a little spot. Here's some hay. Here's some straw. This is where you can stay.
And what kind of food did they provide?
They shared with us a little bit, whatever they had, little bread, little, again, their main thing there is cornmeal. So, in the meantime, it was a little bit quiet there, and my mother was telling them that she's a seamstress, and she could sew. And in every village where we stopped, my mother would announce that she can sew. And if you have a blanket or an old piece of cloth, I can make something for you, even by hand. And in one village especially, there was one peasant who had an old trundle machine, you know, a very, very old machine, and my mother somehow got it going. And they happened to have some thread, and she took one of their blankets and she made a jacket, a double-breasted jacket with lapels, with worked-in pockets, like a sample to show them what she can do. And the whole village just went crazy for this little jacket. And she was busy. She was making jackets for all the children, for the men, because over there they had no coats or jackets. Everybody walked with a blanket around their shoulder. So the people would give her a little cornmeal, sometimes a little piece of dry bacon that they had hanging in the attic. In the winter they would dry that. And we were in seventh heaven. We had some food, finally. But that, again, was short-lived. The Germans were coming into this area, and we had to leave there. Another village again, same thing.
What did you know about what was happening back in Austria and the rest of Eastern Europe?
Nothing.
What kind of information were you
Nothing
getting?
whatsoever. We were just completely cut off from the whole world.
And how did this affect you?
I don't know whether it affected me personally as a child. I don't think that I realized that I had to know what was going on. Of course, my parents realized. And my parents would quite often argue. What shall we do? Shall we keep on running? Shall we give in and let the Germans capture us? And maybe they'll take us to a camp where it's better. We didn't know. There was one incident where my mother and father had a little argument. My mother grabbed me by the hand, and there was a lake. And we walked down to the lake. And she said, let's just go drown ourselves. I pulled on her skirt and I said, no, 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 you can't do that. Papa and Freddie and Trudy are over there, you can't do that. And she said, I just don't know what to do anymore. I pulled her back and we sat down and she kind of calmed down. That was a bad experience. Sorry. Anyway, came back away from the lake. At that point, I really can't blame them. They, you know, I guess they went on each other's nerves a little bit. Hungry, scared, you know. Again, we left that place and kept on going. Sat in the woods again. Found some partisans.
What conversation did you have after that happened with your mother about why she felt that way?
I don't think I was afraid to ask her truthfully. I just tried to calm her down. And I said, no, no, we're going to run. We're going to continue running.
And who calmed you down?
Nobody. Myself.
So go ahead.
I had to be strong for her, you know, at that point. Which I did, of course. They made up and everything was okay again. I mean, it wasn't a big argument. They were just they saw no way out. What do we do? Where do we go? We're hungry. We have nothing. What's the solution going to be? Maybe that's the best thing to do. Either we let the Germans catch us, or we just do it ourselves.
When you were in the village with the Muslims, what was the Muslim attitude towards the peasants, the other peasants?
They never got along well. They were Serbs and they were the Muslims. So they were kind of always, there was always friction.
Why was there friction?
They never got along from years back. I mean, there was always friction. There's friction there today, of course, as you know. They didn't get along. The Muslim kind of kept to themselves. They were like in a separate little area from the other peasants. They were separated.
And what would happen if they encountered each other?
While we were there, we didn't really see any encounters that I can recall. Maybe they did, but I don't know.
So then what happened to you after this incident with your mother in the water?
Okay, away from the lake, we came back to join my father and my brother and sister, and I think we sat down and had a little something, some little cornmeal soup to make up, and picked up again. Like I said, my sister was hiding in this basement. We had to get her out of there. And we continued running again. It was just a continuous of 5 years of running, except for the times when we were locked up.
How dangerous was it for the young women who were running through the woods?
It was dangerous for everybody. I mean, especially for the soldiers, of course. You know, when they saw a young woman or a young girl, whether they were partisans or Ustash or whatever, so we had to we always held on to each other and always watch out.
What incidents happened that were dangerous as far as the partisans or the soldiers encountering a young woman?
Well, the partisans were also on the run, believe it or not, just like us, because that was the underground army. And they didn't waste any time. If they saw anybody having a pair of shoes on, They just pulled them off you and took off. If they saw you had anything at all that they could use, they would just take it.
What women do you know, or young women or older women, that were in danger from these men who were
Well,
in
at
the
that
woods?
point, we were just the 5 of us again. You know, we kept separating. There was no way to run together with 60 people and 30 people, or not even 10. How the 5 of us stayed together was another miracle. You know, we just holding on to each other and just kept going.
So then you went where?
Again, back into the woods. Sat in the woods again,
Where were you able to sleep while you were in the woods?
on the floor.
And what time of the year was it now?
Now it's beginning to be fall and getting to be cold again. And now we're starting to look, well, maybe we can find another village because winter is coming upon us. And we did, you know, encountered a little village and went down again.
And who were these people?
They were again peasants that took us and let us sleep in. It was, they didn't give us room in their little house. They had no room, but it was like an overhang, like a carport type of thing where there was a roof. And again, you know, they gave us, they had hay and straw for the animals, so they gave us some hay and straw to sleep on. And that's what it keeps you warm, believe it or not.
And so how cold was it?
Well, it was getting to be fall. It was getting chilly. Our one blanket was getting ripped. Again, no clothes, no nothing to wear. Somehow we acquired another army blanket, I think, from one of the peasants. So we had another blanket. So whoever was cold got to wear it for a few minutes, and then the other person had it a few minutes.
And so how long were you in this next village?
Again, a few days, a few weeks. And now, at the places where we were a few weeks, my parents went looking if there is a schoolhouse for me to go to. So some of these villages had a one-room schoolhouse. And I would try to go. I would make my way, like in the winter time, the snow was like 7, 8 feet high. And the peasants would make a path to go. Now, it was cold enough so the snow wasn't melting yet, otherwise it would be an avalanche. So I would go in the morning to this little schoolhouse in my little knitted slippers with a blanket and sit in there and not understand everything because the Yugoslavian language, I was lucky I picked up the language real quick. But again, when you're learning things in school, it's a little bit different of how the peasants speak. So I was sitting there and I didn't really know how to read and write real good, but the teacher would teach me. And if she got annoyed with me, she had a big stick. And she made me do this. She made me put my fingertips together, and she would bash me and hit me over the fingers if I didn't do it right. And I would come home crying to my parents and say, I'm not going back to the school. I'm getting hit there. Well, you have to go to school. You're going to grow up to be dumb. You know, you have to go to school.
Who did the teacher think you were?
She kept asking me who I was, and I was afraid to tell her that I was Jewish. And I said I was from Zagreb. And she says, how come you don't speak Yugoslavian? I says, well, I was traveling with my father. He was a traveling man, and I wasn't there very long. And I kept giving all kinds of excuses to these elderly ladies who wore these big skirts and had a bun, you know, one of those old-fashioned teachers.
How many children were in your class?
About 10.
And who did they think you were?
They didn't ask me.
And how did you get along with them?
I got along fine in most of the places, most of the schools. But that was again a week or two and I would leave again. So there goes Daddy again sitting down teaching me. So between learning German from him and learning Yugoslavian in the little schoolhouses, I was getting a little bit mixed up. But at that time I had the Yugoslavian language under command. I really spoke it fluently.
And how did that help you?
It helped me because when we would go to a village and we could speak to them. There was no obstacle. We could speak to them. And when they saw that we speak Slavian, they were not reluctant to take us in.
Who in the family was speaking the language at that time?
I was speaking it the best. I picked up very quickly, and my sister did, and my brother. My mother spoke Polish, of course, because she was from Poland. My father spoke the least.
And so when you went into these villages, what did your father or mother tell you to ask or to tell the people in the villages?
Would they please let us in? Well, my mother was able to speak to them, and my father with his broken Yugoslavian. Would you give us a place where to stay? We are poor people, we have no place where to sleep. In fact, we can do any work for you. We have a strong young boy here. He wasn't so strong, he was so skinny, but anyway, we can do some work for you, chop some wood, can we do anything? And occasionally he would, help them a little bit. If they had animals, we would tend to the animals, just so that we are not begging for anything. We were begging actually, but we felt maybe if we do something, it wouldn't make us feel so bad.
Being that you understood the language the best and spoke the language the best, what conversations did you overhear that you may not have been meant to overhear?
Oh, how long are these people going to stay here? How long will we keep them? We don't have food ourselves. How are we going to support them? Stuff like that.
And how did that affect you?
I would tell my mother, did you hear what they just said? Yes, I heard what they just said. Don't worry, we're only going to stay overnight. We're going to leave again.
And
So
how was it for you as a child to just keep picking
this
up
was my
and
way
going?
of life. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know any better, I suppose. I was, like I said, frightened all the time, but kept on going.
And then where did you go next?
Again, village to village. We finally wound up in Dubrovnik. Again, they locked us up. The Ustasha caught up with us.
How did they catch you?
They just walked through the woods, and here we are, and the guns, and we marched. We had to march in front of them. Dubrovnik, they locked us up again, was on the mountain, again this big, big building. We couldn't see no daylight again. When they took us in, we noticed that it was just beautiful. It was springtime again, and beautiful trees and beautiful homes on top of the mountain. They locked us up there, and again, over there, I think they were giving us a little bit of food, some bread.
How many people were with you then?
There were more people there locked up too. I would say about 40.
And where were these people from?
Again, there were also people like us. They were running.
Was there anybody there that you had encountered previously in the woods?
We were running in the very beginning with this one family. Their name was Ellenbogen. And I think we encountered them a couple of times. We met up with them. It was a husband, wife, and a young daughter, and her boyfriend. And we met them again.
And where were you now?
Now we're in Dubrovnik, which is very well known right now. And we're locked up again.
And what type of facility was it?
It must have been one of those huge old buildings. It wasn't a silo. It's just a big stone building. What they kept there, I have no idea, but that's what it was.
And what were the conditions there?
Very bad.
Why
Very
were they
bad.
bad?
Well, this was already now 1944, and there was nothing there, absolutely. It was cement floors, there nothing to sleep on, nothing, just bad conditions. We were always hungry, always hungry. And my brother, he was a growing boy, he was the hungriest of all of us.
And
he
who were your guards?
Again, the Ustasha was outside the door.
And what other languages did you hear beside Yugoslavian?
From them, you mean?
Or from anybody who was outside? What other
Well,
languages?
outside we really didn't hear. We were inside, so all we could hear sometimes maybe a command in Yugoslavian. The Yugoslavian army was speaking Slavic.
And so when the guards did come inside, who Who do you remember of the guards?
I don't recall them coming inside. They were outside. That's what I noticed when we were taken in, and we were just inside.
On what occasion did you have to go outside?
We couldn't go outside. We were locked up. No outside.
How long were you in there?
We were there a few weeks, and there we got liberated. The Russian army came into Dubrovnik.
And what were you hearing overhead as far as planes and bombing?
Planes bombing all the time.
What did you think it meant?
We knew they're bombing.
Who did you think was bombing?
We knew it was the Germans. They would, when we were laying in the ditches, they would come down so low we could see the pilot releasing the bombs. That's how low they were flying. How they missed us, I don't know. They didn't have a very good target, obviously. They missed us.
If you were in the woods, how did they get past the trees to see where
In
you
the
were?
woods, we would hear the planes, but it wasn't as dangerous because it was wooded area. You could hide under a bush, under a thing. When we were in an open field running, that's where the problem came in. And there were quite a few occasions where we had to cross over from one wooded area over the stream, and it was open fields.
And so when these planes came swooping down, how
You
did
throw yourself on the ground. That's the only thing you can do.
How close did they get to you?
Very close. I could hear the things right next to us.
And how was
Falling.
that for you?
Scared. I mean, we were completely scared out of our heads. Our parents crushing us, laying on top of us, trying to protect us. That was a very scary part.
So now you're in Dubrovnik, you said, and tell me about the day you were liberated.
Well, the Russians pried open the doors, came in, Zhid, Zhid, Zhid. They kept saying in Russian, and they didn't. They were not very nice. They were very poor soldiers. They were dressed very poorly too. They didn't have any clothes. Their jackets were torn. And we told them, my mother could speak Polish, so the Russian is very similar. She tried to converse with them. And we are hungry, we have nothing to wear. And they said, we have nothing either. And you got anything good? And then if they saw anything, they pulled it off people. They took it away from us. And then the word was passed around that they're going to rape all the women and girls. So here we go again. We are running again. We are trying to get away from these Russians. So we did.
And so where did you run?
We ran into the village. And then, of course, we heard that the war was over.
We're going to change tapes. So, Mrs. Berry, how did you get the word that the Russians were going to try and rape the women?
The village people were just as much threatened as us. And of course, they were trying to hide. And they told us.
On what occasion did these guards who were guarding you when you were in Dubrovnik cruel or torturous?
No, they didn't torture us. They just kept us locked up. They didn't hit us.
What do you remember their position being?
Well, if you can picture Yugoslavian army, they were all uneducated peasant boys in that area. They really didn't know. They were just doing their duty, what their superiors told them. Pick up your gun. If the superior would say, you shoot now, there's a goose flying by, you shoot it now, so we have something for dinner. They were really uneducated boys.
And what happened to the boys when the Russians came?
The soldiers, you mean? I really don't know what happened to them. They must have withdrawn because they were trying to follow the Germans.
So now the villagers told you that the Russians were going to rape the women. And what happened?
The Russians themselves told us that they want to rape the women. The soldiers
And what did you know
themselves.
about that as a young girl?
I really didn't know what it meant. My mother knew what it meant, of course. And
What did she
said,
tell
you
you?
girls have to hide, especially my sister. You have to hide again now. You have to hide. Don't go with any of those soldiers, even if they try to promise you anything, to give you bread or anything, don't go. And we kind of stuck together like glue, so.
What did she tell you, the reason for that being?
I didn't comprehend. I didn't know what it meant to be raped. I didn't understand. I had no sex education whatsoever. I didn't know anything. I suppose my sister knew. She was a little older. My mother explained a few things to me after, and you have to be careful of this. And then I knew.
And so how did that affect you?
Of course, I'm a little bit more scared again. What can I tell you? Always scared of different things, but scared.
So where did your sister and you go?
We hid again in a basement of somebody's little house until the Russian army pulled back a little bit, and I guess they got busy trying to go through the village completely, so they didn't bother with us.
And what did they tell you about what was happening in the rest of the occupied zones?
They didn't know anything. The ignorance was bliss over there, like I said, and if they knew something, they wouldn't have told us either. The Russian army didn't treat us well. They were very abrupt. They were big, husky guys. They had a bad time themselves, like I said. They were hungry themselves. They were undernourished looking. They had no boots, no clothes. They were very poor soldiers.
So then what did it mean for you to be liberated?
It meant that maybe the war is going to be over soon. We didn't know if the war is over or not. There was nobody to tell us. Then finally, a few days later, we heard, through the village that the war is over, and the German army has completely withdrawn. The Russians are here now.
And when was that?
1940, the end of 44, beginning of 45.
So again, it's winter time?
No, it's springtime again, I think. Yeah, in Dubrovnik.
So what year was it?
I think it was, well, the war was over in 40.